millions of litres of poorly treated or untreated sewage, industrial and pharmaceutical wastewater are spewed into our rivers and dams. This is mostly because the sanitation system is in an appalling condition. There are reports of typhoid fever in parts of the country, and this brings us to this question then, that is South Africa really having a water crisis? To help us make sense of this, we're joined by affiliated professor in the Center for Environmental Management at the University of the Free State. That's Anthony Turton. Professor Turton, thank you very much for joining us. So you believe that we have a 20-year water crisis in the making?
Good afternoon to you and the listeners. Just before I came on air, I pulled out a document, a parliamentary briefing that I drafted in 2008. We spoke about this very same topic. So since 2008, we have a paper trail of documentary evidence of briefings to Parliament in which we spoke about what we refer to from the scientific community as a slow onset disaster. At that point in time, I was the spokesperson of the CSIR responsible for all water-related matters. And it was in that context that we did this formal parliamentary briefing. So the bottom line is that we've known about this for some period of time. We've predicted that this is going to happen, and more importantly, the last data that I have of any reliability suggests that we have over 5 billion litres of wastewater sewage every single day, approximately 4.1 billion of which is discharged back into our rivers, untreated or at best partly treated. And this, of course, is a recipe for disaster, because in that sewage return flow, we have partly metabolized medication, including antibiotics, including antiretrovirals, and including a whole host of other chemical compounds, all of which have now gone into breeding places, breeding environments for superbugs or viruses, bacteria, etc. So this is very, very well understood from a scientific perspective. It has not been understood or even accepted as being real from a political perspective, and this is our problem.
The source of this pollution and how it finds ourselves into our rivers and our water systems, and it's incumbent upon whom to make sure that this does not happen?
Well, it's very simple, and it's also very complex. It's very simple because all water in South Africa has been nationalized. It falls under the ambit of the Department of Water and Sanitation, and they are the regulator, and they are also the main player in the field. But the problem lies in the fact that water service delivery is the responsibility of municipalities. So the Department of Water and Sanitation at national level is unable to intervene at local level, at municipal level. And this is where the problem lies, because all of our wastewater in South Africa is treated in a wastewater treatment works. Approximately 60% of our current wastewater treatment works are dysfunctional in some form or other. Some are completely, totally, 100% collapsed. And of course, the problem now is that because we're a water-constrained economy, all of the wastewater we discharge back into our rivers immediately goes back into our drinking water system, because we simply recycle water in South Africa. Everybody's toilet is upstream of somebody else's drinking water. And this is our fundamental problem in South Africa. So this has been a problem waiting to really manifest itself. And I hope we're not at that point now. I hope we can just wake up and smell the roses. But if we don't wake up and smell the roses, having been through this pandemic now, we know exactly what health issues can cause in the economy, and we have to do all we can to avert this crisis.
And that's just it. What's the worst that could happen, this as we are getting sporadic reports of typhoid fever breaking out in different provinces?
Well, the worst that can happen is that we've created in our dams and rivers perfect breeding ground for a range of pathogens. So it's not just the typhoid, it's a range of pathogens. And of course, when I say perfect breeding ground, what have you got in it? You've got elevated nutrients, which is what all these pathogens need to survive. You've got elevated temperatures because of global warming. You've got elevated levels of very, very small concentrations of antibiotic and antiretrovirals, which enables those pathogens to mutate in the presence of the very drugs that are going to be used to combat them later on. And coming out of this, the logical conclusion coming out of this is that there's a probability, there's not a definite link, but there's a probable link that ultimately we can potentially produce drug-resistant pathogens. And this is the problem, because globally we're seeing more and more drug-resistant pathogens emerging, and we see this in the fight against TB, where you've got multiple drug-resistant pathogens. And we simply created a perfect condition for that same issue that's happened in TB to be replicated across other illnesses. And this is the logical outcome of if we do nothing. We just simply cannot carry on doing nothing.
This is not, it's actually a scary picture that you paint, Professor Turton. When you go to other countries on the continent, you're advised to use bottled water, be it at a hotel or even at a B&B, because tap water is not the best. Are we getting to that point where you won't even be able to brush your teeth just by opening your tap? You must get bottled water?
Well, I'm not a supporter of the bottled water industry at all, because I think they really just export a lot of pollution in the form of plastic bottles. That's not a long-term solution to our crisis. But the reality is that go to any of the smaller municipalities in South Africa, and increasingly in some of the bigger municipalities. Johannesburg is periodically without water. Durban is periodically without water. Cape Town is periodically without water. Port Elizabeth, East London. So it's not just a small scale incident. I live in the Port Elizabeth area, in the Port Shepstone area, a place called Ugu District Municipality, and we have very, very appalling water services. And in fact, when we do have water services, the water coming out of the tap is so appallingly dirty that there's no guarantee that even the vaguest, most basic treatment's been done. So just because it comes out of a tap doesn't mean to say it's safe anymore. And this speaks to another issue now relating to the Department of Water and Sanitation. There's been a growing deficit of trust in the department, and part of that trust deficit has been the fact that for some reason or other, some senior people have decided to stop reporting blue and green drop status. And this, of course, has merely covered up the fact that the problem is growing and getting bigger and bigger, and it's also added fuel to the fire of growing public mistrust. So central to this whole thing is a breakdown of trust and confidence in our government, and we have to do everything that we can to prevent that, because if we cannot trust our government to do things in the best interest of the citizens, then I'm afraid we're on a very, very slippery slope in South Africa.
This sounds like a man-made disaster that is quite avoidable. One, is this because we do not have qualified people that can pick these issues up or that can deal with these issues? Two, you talk about the Water and Sanitation Department yesterday having a water and summit out in Midrand in Johannesburg. The Water and Sanitation Minister saying it's not enough to just have plans, it's time for action. A lot of people are calling for action. You talk about a document that you produced back in 2008. It's 2022. Is this also just another pie-in-the-sky dream, if you will?
Well, yes, all of those things are relevant. I'm part of the SA Business Water Chamber, which was part of the process that you've just spoken about, that summit, that water summit. And so I've had the inside briefing as to what's been going on there. And the information that I have is that government is taking this very seriously now. They're suddenly realizing that this is a serious matter. It's not that we don't have skills. We do have skilled people, but those skilled people have been pushed out of the economy for various reasons, various factors. And one of those factors has been the whole, let's call it the criminalization of the supply chain management process. And it's that criminalization of the supply chain management process that has squeezed technical skills out, and that has also enabled all sorts of skullduggery to take place. But the unintended consequence of that has been that it slowly started strangling the technical competence that we have, because all of that competence resides in companies, and those companies have had a choice. They either play the corruption game to get the contract, in which case they're forever compromised, or they don't play the corruption game, they don't get the contract, and they go out of business, or they're forced to go and do business elsewhere. So this is part of the skills collapse we've got in South Africa, and this is one of the central reasons why the SA Business Water Chamber has been created, simply to try and assist government as far as possible with halting that let's call it the implosion of those skills, to halt that, to stabilize that to the best of our ability, and then to slowly start rebuilding. But we don't have a skills shortage. We don't have enough competent people in municipal and other governments. That's the problem. It's not that we don't have skills out there in society. A lot of the skilled people are, in fact, unemployed or unable to get into contracts for various regulatory and contractual supply chain management related matters. So we've got to depoliticize the supply chain. We've got to get back to a situation where technically competent people must be employed and must be fired if they don't deliver. And then we must completely separate this whole matter now from the politics of patronage, where the feeding trough enables people to get paid, the political payback time. This is the heart of our problem. We've got to break that cycle if we are ever going to pull out of this mess.
So let's talk about you and I. In this population of some 16 million people, just how much water does an individual need to survive? Talking straight through from the food that lands on your plate to when you open the tap.
Well, there are three numbers that are important. The average person needs approximately 2 liters of water per person per day to survive. You're not going to smell good, and you're not going to be able to clean your body and live under hygienic conditions, but you will survive. If you want to live under clean and hygienic conditions, you need approximately 200 liters per person per day. So from 2 liters for survival, 200 liters, which is the volume of water needed to sustain a reasonably healthy lifestyle. But of course, the big one is 2,000 liters of water per person per day. That's the water for food. So that's the context. 2 liters to survive, 200 liters to live a reasonable quality life, 2,000 liters or 2 tons of water per person per day just to put the food on your table. The water for food is the big constraint, not the water for drinking. Everybody is all excited about the drinking water issues, but very few people understand that the real economic issue is water for food. In South Africa, 63% of our total national water budget is allocated to agriculture. And rapidly that water is disappearing, and very, very rapidly that water is no longer becoming fit for human consumption or use for irrigation because of all of the pollution we are putting into it. So this is our crisis. If we see that collapse, water for food, then we go into a food insecure situation. At the moment, we are energy insecure. We are fast becoming water insecure, and we are becoming capital insecure, capital constrained, and ultimately we can become food constrained. So these dominoes are falling one by one, and this is why we have to stop that. And this is what the Business Water Chamber has been about, to try and stop that. We've got to really communicate with each other very clearly about what needs to be done, because this is not a let's frighten the baby kind of scenario now. This is about really let's look each other in the eyes and say, we can't carry on down this pathway much longer without seeing catastrophic failures of a domino effect nature rippling across the entire economy.
This, as we are called a water scarce country, meaning what exactly?
Well, we are water constrained. We always have been a water constrained economy, but that's not a problem, because being water constrained, we've still managed to grow our economy to become one of the most diversified economies in the world, given the hydrological constraints that we have. And I always take issue with people when they say that we are water scarce, because we're not really water scarce. We are surrounded by a massive ocean which is full of water. 2/3 of planet Earth is water. We don't have a water problem, we have a salt problem. So once we understand that the real problem we've got to manage is too much salt in the water, well, that's a completely different paradigm that we're into now. Now we've got actually an abundant, inexhaustible supply of water on our doorstep. But we haven't yet made that mindset shift. And there's all kinds of noises being made about, it's too expensive, or it's too polluting, or whatever. All of those are factually incorrect. But we need to start having honest conversations now about the fact that we are not water constrained. Our problem is not a water shortage. Our problem is a salt abundance. Too much salt. Let's sort that out, because from an engineering, a science and technology perspective, there's solutions to all of those things. And what's really interesting is that globally, the cost of desalination is now coming down to 30 US cents per cubic meter. And there's a race on now in Saudi Arabia to drive that cost down to 20 US cents per cubic meter. That is cheaper than we currently produce potable water from from drinking water sources in South Africa today. So the technology is driving that as a major a new resource for the future. And this, I'm afraid, has to be the future of South Africa if we are serious about creating jobs, because we are water constrained as an economy to the extent of 25 billion cubic meters of water per annum. That's what our constraint will be by 2030 if we want to create full employment. And just to give you an indication of what that volume means, or how big it is, the total volume of all of our dams, every dam in the country, if it's full, we've got 38 billion cubic meters of water. So we've got to create 2/3 of the total volume of our existing storage capacity. We've got to create over and above what we already have, and we have to do that in the next decade. This has to be a national strategic priority, and of course it is entirely doable from a science, engineering, technology and capital perspective, entirely doable, but we need policy clarity, and we need to really communicate clearly to all stakeholders, including the public, that actually this is a very good news story, because that's the way that we're going to employ the massive number of unemployed people that we have, a growing number every single day. The water is an economic enabler. And unless we understand it as an economic enabler and continue to sideline and marginalize this conversation, we are never going to get out of this nosedive. And therefore, we're going to continually, 5 years from now, we'll have the same conversation about are we living in a water crisis or not.
Water is life in every aspect, painting a very desperate situation of South Africa's water state. Professor Anthony Turton is affiliated professor in the Center for Environmental Management at the University of the Free State. Thank you for your time.